Hi, everybody, and hola, Grace. I'm so happy and honored to have you here with us today to talk about climate, to talk about climate disruption, to talk about all the things that I see happening in certainly our planet and our lives. And I'm so excited to be able to share your voice with our members and with our audience. So as a reminder, my name is Isabel Gonzalez Whitaker. I am the Associate Vice President of Moms Clean Air Force and the Director of EcoMadres, which is our Latino division of Moms Clean Air Force. And collectively, we represent 1.5 million moms and caregivers around the country that work to fight for clean air and a healthier community. So today I have Grace Bastidas with us, a friend and also a colleague from magazine and publishing days who now runs parents.com and the whole Parents enterprise. I'm going to read your bio so that I don't get anything wrong. So you are a writer, you are an editor, you are increasingly an on-air personality. You know I love it when I see you on the Today Show. And you are ultimately a parenting expert. You are the editor-in-chief of Parents, which is almost 100 years old, if not already 100 years old, and you reach millions and millions of parents and caregivers every single month and day, especially through digital now. And you're Latina, you were raised, I believe, in New York. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And you have 2 daughters, and you also host a great podcast called That New Mom Life. And before all of this, of course, I remember you running a Latina-centric and Latinx-centric parenting enterprise. So I'm just really honored to have you here today. I'm going to start with the first question, which is, what do you see your audience interested in when it comes to this idea of climate disruption and air quality, and how is it affecting parents' lives? And how have you seen that change over the years?
Well, thanks so much for having me, Isabel. I'm a big fan of yours and a big fan of everything that Moms Clean Air Force does and really fighting for families everywhere. And yes, so Parents is almost 100 years old, and I've been the editor-in-chief for 2 years. But a lot is also driven by my role as a mother of 2. And when it comes to climate change, I think what we're seeing a lot more of is that anxiety, because it can feel like this unsolvable issue. And while it's a source of great stress for parents who worry about a lot of different things, so we have a lot on our plates and a lot of concerns. But with climate change in recent years, it's hit even closer to home between record-breaking temperatures, the impact of wildfire smoke, and extreme weather. So for us as a brand, what we try to do is really give parents the tools, caregivers the tools to really talk to their kids and explain difficult situations with them, for them. And with climate change impacting if kids can even go outside to play, these conversations have become even harder. And it's really impacting the decision making in the household, how families choose to live their life, not only from their purchasing decisions and if a product's sustainable or eco-friendly, but also where do they live? They used to look at they used to look at the proximity of the good schools when they were choosing a place to relocate to, but now they're also looking at what cities are climate resilient. And it goes as far as thinking about family planning. They're starting to think about the planet as well because they're worried about their kids' safety and the world they're leaving behind for their children. So we let them know as a brand that it's okay to be anxious. It's normal. It's what we're all going through, but there are things that they can do. And that's where we make it really actionable and simple for them.
And that's so great that you all provide that service. And it's fascinating to hear how you're right. When people moved, the first thing as a parent is you would look at the school grade, except or whatever the equivalent for your district would be. And now I've noticed that even some of those real estate apps, they'll have how close are you to a chemical facility? So it's really becoming so much more integrated into our lives, and it's so much information. So that can, to your point, be overwhelming and scary. So to that point, when you are writing articles and imagining the direction of the content that you all are providing for this massive audience, does civic engagement or advocacy play a part in that at all? Have you seen a larger appetite on parents' parts, on behalf of parents or caregivers, to want to have more of a voice in our democracy?
I really do think that caregivers are just so overburdened in this world that we live in. So really, our goal is to offer actionable solutions that make them feel supported while giving them a sense of control and agency over their families' lives. So that means giving them advice to ease their everyday, tips for reducing or eliminating plastic, ideas for teaching your kids about sustainability, a template for writing to their elected officials. We try to make it as simple as possible. So we don't want to put that extra pressure. Yes, we talk to people like yourself who are very engaged in climate advocacy. We talk to moms who are scientists or dads who are scientists. We talk about people out there creating change as a form of inspiration. But when we think about how they can create change within their lives, we try to make it really simple and just accessible so that they don't feel this another pressure of like, what else can I be doing to save the world for my children?
Right. It's a lot. So I totally get it. But I appreciate you allowing, us and folks like myself and from similar sorts of organizations, right? Because there's also, like us, there are other advocacy groups that advocate for other aspects of life and a healthier, safer community. So yes, for us, we too sort of try to adopt that. So it's like, that's why we do petitions and we'll write them so that you don't have to, right? So it's just like, promise this only takes 5 seconds, but here's an easy way to have your voice heard, and it really makes a difference. I want to go back also to what you were talking about, because I think it's all very related, this idea of climate anxiety, and just general anxiety in this moment that we're living in, as caregivers and as frankly as individuals, and being Latina. And I can only speak for myself, and I see it as sort of like an extrapolation of my community as a whole, but and you might have a different experience, but I didn't grow up necessarily being able to call things or out as creating anxiety, right? That could have been perceived as a sign of weakness, or fixating on something that could be ignored easily. But we know now that anxiety has physical impacts, mental impacts. What do you say to your Latino community about the destigmatization of mental health issues, and being more open to calling anxiety what it is and calling depression what it is, and then taking those the tools and resources that are available to us without a sense of shame? And maybe I'm talking as from somebody from a very specific Gen X generation, but is it getting better? And what do you see from where you sit?
I think I can totally relate, and a lot of people in our community can relate. Before I became the editor-in-chief of Parents, I was the editor-in-chief of Parents Latina, which you had mentioned, and so much of what we were doing there, this publication was entirely in English, and so much of what we were doing there is, how do you take the best parts of how you were raised and leave behind the parts that maybe weren't that great in how you're raising your children? And we really had so many conversations about mental health and how to take that shame away from this topic that affects so many people, and that is nothing to be ashamed of, and something that we should be talking about. And it just really was one of those topics that we would continually discuss, because you're right, when you grow up in an immigrant family, we're taught to forge forward and ignore those feelings. So there is this shame around sharing your struggles with someone outside your household. If you share them with somebody inside, they're like, oh, go take a nap. So there was that very much like, this is really nothing, just sleep it off. But, I think as we think about where we are now and as a community, there's nothing that we wouldn't do to protect our kids as part of this Latinx community. So we're starting to hear a lot more about these conversations about mental health and breaking down those barriers as more young people experience mental health issues and really talk about it, talk about it with their friends and talk about it with their families and just make themselves heard. And I do think that having access to culturally competent mental health professionals is so helpful in really knowing how far we've come in terms of not even discussing these things to really trying to break down those barriers. And when it comes to climate change, acknowledging our anxiety and fears is so important, especially as one of those groups who's most impacted by climate disruption, and just creating that awareness and advocating for ourselves and those in our community who may be more vulnerable or who may still feel that sense of shame of, I shouldn't complain. And for us Latinx people, we have such a deep respect for Mother Nature and Madre Tierra. So speaking up and sharing our concerns as a collective can only have a ripple effect when it comes to really getting more people involved.
I 1,000% agree. And I'm always so grateful when I see people sharing their stories and, being vulnerable, because at some point it's no longer going to be being vulnerable. It's just going to be being normal, right? Like, this is creating anxiety for me. It's normal to feel this way. And here's what I'm doing about it. So I certainly try to model that in my own life. So you mentioned this idea, which is sort of the root of EcoMadres, which is that the Latino community in the United States is among the most negatively impacted by air pollution, by climate change. I think I read recently that 1 in 4 Latinos essentially is living with climate change daily, whether that's somebody who is a farm worker or somebody living in the state of Texas, Florida, California, the states where these sorts of things are happening with incredible frequency, from wildfires to flooding to extreme heat. Now, you told me once, and I hope it's okay to share, that you grew up with asthma. In retrospect, do you think that you lived in a frontline or fence line community, and we just didn't call it that at that time?
I mean, I definitely lived in an urban community, and I still have asthma. Thankfully, knock on wood, it's mild. So I've always thought about the air I breathe and have never taken for granted breathing freely. And I inherited my asthma from my abuelita. But while it's hereditary, I still needed to watch out for triggers. I grew up in a very dense environment in Elmhurst, Queens, in New York, so not in any beautiful green space. So pollen, when was a big trigger for me. So on a beautiful spring day, that would make me wheezy, and of course, pollution. So living in an urban environment, and it makes you more aware of poor air quality, which, as you know, and as you said, affects Latinos disproportionately because of where we live. So that people in low income communities have to bear the brunt of this racial inequity is really just horrible. And not only that, but pollution triggers an asthma flare up. I know that can lead to missed school days, which can lead to kids falling behind, which can lead to other adverse issues later in life. So the knock on effect is really huge and has such an impact on children, to when you think about all the things that something can cause, something like pollution can cause.
Absolutely. And I often think that people forget that there's I hadn't heard it said the way you just said it, but like one thing can lead to another, can lead to another. So it becomes like entirely systemic in somebody's life, how that one attack, let's say, can have such a ripple effect. But also, I like to remind people that, especially within our community, it's compounded. So it's like, oftentimes like we grow, there, we could grow up like in a dense urban city next to a highway that has, tailpipe pollution, but also possibly because of where we live, there's a factory near us, right? That might have, or an oil refinery that might have flare-ups. And we might live in a state that has extreme heat, which makes the particulate matter even worse. So it's like, piecing it out individually, but also looking at like the whole of the experience. And for me also, I think, and I, one of the things that I appreciate so much that you do is to provide education and information to all parents. And for us at EcoMadres to do it for the Latino community that is traditionally underserved with information and education. So, it is the end of Women's History Month. I'm going to just say that you're one of my heroes, one of my sheroes.
You're one of my sheroes.
Okay, well, aside from me, thank you very much. And I'm sure there are other women that you admire. Can you tell us somebody in your life that you want to give a shout out to or that you admire for Women's History Month?
Oh, this may seem a little cliche, but my mom, who sadly passed away some years ago, is somebody that I admired for her hustle, and it informs my everyday life still. Just her spirit and her hustle and her wanting to do the best she could for her children under different circumstances. And, I was thinking about, as I thought about sustainability and our conversation today, I just remember conservancy being something that just came naturally to my mom, who would, as many Latina moms would, repurpose any plastic container that came into our house, who would wash the paper towels, hang them up and reuse them, who would take the dinner leftovers and take them and turn them into the next day's breakfast. She'd take old t-shirts and turn them into rags. And we didn't have a lot of money, so she had to get really creative, and nothing went to waste. So that sustainability is really in our roots because we saw it firsthand. And it's something that inspires me when I get that a glass jar and I wash it out and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna put something in here.
Yeah, it's funny because I often think that, at least for me, so much of our conservation efforts, to your point, were economically driven, like turn off the lights every time you leave the room. But I also think that there's something cultural, and I haven't quite pinned it down, and maybe there's a book out there that somebody's written. But, I mean, like I can remember my abuela, my grandmother, never threw away her garbage can. And that thing, like she would just re-wallpaper the garbage can. And because it was like she just didn't feel the need to have to like essentially throw it out and get a new one. And there's something about this sense of regeneration that I think is culturally rooted in who we are. And I don't know where that is born from, but I'm grateful for it every day because it makes sort of these adjustments that we want to make and that I want to make in my household all the easier because I've been doing them all my life, right? And like taking the big Mexican bag to the grocery store instead of relying on the paper bags or on the plastic bags. So what's one thing you do in your household that is making the planet a better place?
So I think we do a lot of little things as we make it, again, more actionable. Like you said, I take my bag to the supermarket, and I always, when I don't take that bag to the supermarket, I am just walking around with about 5 different things and trying not to drop them on the floor. We use stainless steel water bottles everywhere we go. You can fill them up at the airport. You can just fill them up wherever. And that's just super handy. We're really trying to say no. So my daughters are 9 and 11, and we're trying to say no to the freebie at the dentist's office. When you get your teeth cleaned, they try to give you a bunch of stuff. We don't do traditional goodie bags at birthday parties anymore. Instead, I give the kids like an edible treat, something, and go enjoy that in your house. We're very mindful about the stuff that we bring into our house, and we also make sure and pass down so much kid stuff and clothes to cousins and younger friends, and making sure that they're in good condition. Instead of driving, we'll walk if we can. At this age, it's really about showing my kids that every little bit counts. And we're also teaching them an appreciation for nature by getting outside as much as possible. All year round, we go on hikes and we stop and we look at the salamanders, or if we find an interesting looking leaf, we'll look at that. In the summer, we love to swim in the river, and my daughters will take stock of like water levels as we see different little bodies of water. We go upstate New York a lot. And not only does it really help, getting outside help bolster their mental health, but it makes them even more connected to the world we live in. So it's about having that multi-prong approach in appreciating nature, but how we can help Mother Earth as well.
Well, I love that you're raising some environmentalists, whether you mean to or not. So we're here for it. This is my plug for anybody who's watching to please take out your phone and click on the QR code that we're going to be showing up on the screen. Again, speaking of like overburdened time and not having the energy to do too much, this link will take you to our website and to all of our petitions. You can look and see, and a signature goes a long way and is an amazing way to participate in our civic processes in this country, especially on behalf of Madre Tierra. So thank you, Grace, so much for giving us your time today.
Thank you, Isabel.
Thank you for the work that you do for all parents and moms everywhere.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.